welcome to Coffee Talk by CertiProf. This is a space to share and discuss educational topics with guests who have a passion for teaching and an interest for learning. In this episode, we will talk about the Scrum Guide 2020 changes, how they impact the certifications, and will they really improve Scrum? Today, we have the pleasure to talking to Dr. Rössler. He's a Scrum Trainer, university professor, and Agile Practices consultant. Hi, Dr. Jork. Welcome again to our Coffee Talk.
Hey, Gina. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the invitation. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say thank you for having the other session with us. We had a great conversation in Spanish. So we actually wanted to take this opportunity to have a similar conversation, but touch some points that we actually didn't touch on our last conversation. So let's start with the questions.
Sure.
What consider are the 5 most significant changes in 2020 Scrum Guide?
Oh, okay. There are quite a lot, so let me try to melt it down to 5 changes. Okay. Well, I would like to start with 4 topics that on the first view seem to be a little bit on the semantic side or language adjustment terminology things. But I think that they are actually going a little bit deeper, and it's not only language changes, but they also try to make these changes to emphasize more on the philosophy of Scrum. Okay, so let me highlight these 4 changes that on the first side are only language changes. The first one is they changed or they eliminated the word roles and they replaced it by accountabilities. Okay, so why is that? I think it's not just a terminology thing. There's something a little bit more important behind it. Okay. People might have confused in the past roles and job titles. Okay. So Scrum Master is not a job title. It's truly a role. Okay. So the important thing is not that you're called a Scrum Master, but rather that you take on the duties of a Scrum Master, that you really assume the responsibility of a Scrum Master. So the title on your business card is not really significant. What is really significant is that you exert or perform or live rather the role of a Scrum Master. So I think that's why they changed it a little bit, okay? Another terminology change that we have is the development team was renamed. They're called now developers, okay? Not anymore development team, but now it's developers, okay? This change also might be a little bit cosmetic, okay, on the first side. But I think it also makes a lot of sense and emphasizes the philosophy of Scrum. Because it removes, first of all, it removes the common confusion. People were always mixing up the term Scrum team and development team, okay? And for some people, it wasn't even clear at all that these are 2 different things. So they thought it's synonyms and you can just exchange the 2 terms. And sometimes you use the term Scrum team and sometimes you use the term development team, but actually they're completely different, okay? So I think that change in terminology helps to prevent this confusion, okay? And there's another thing. I think it emphasizes also the fact that there is only one single team, because if you have a development team inside the Scrum team, it could create a certain understanding of it's us against the others, okay? So there are 2 teams or there's a sub-team in the Scrum team, and people should feel actually as one single cohesive team. And I think that idea is pretty much supported by eliminating the word development team and replacing it by developers, okay?
I wanted to make a point that I love it because it's actually now only one team working towards the same product goal. And even if they come from different organizations, because what happens is that sometimes the development team is from another company. So people don't really make that click that saying, oh my God, they're the development team, but then we have the Scrum team. So like they didn't understand that they were all actually part of one team. So thanks to these changes, no more people assuming that the developers are not in the same team as the product owner. So I really like that change.
Yeah, Gina, I think you're making a really important point here, because what you were just mentioned is something that I've seen a lot of times in reality, in real world Scrum projects, that you have a development team that is completely external and only the product owner and Scrum Master are internal, or you have even mixed teams and you have 3-4 internal developers and you add another 3 or 4 external developers. And I think that that's a really important point that you're making here. Yeah. All right. So let me go on. So I just mentioned 2 terminology things. There's another one. The term servant leader was also removed, and now it's called a leader who serves the team, or they call it also a true leader is another term that appears in your Scrum Guide. Okay. So let me make that very clear. They certainly do not want to create a hierarchy within the Scrum team, okay? So if they use a true leader, it doesn't mean that now the Scrum Master is the boss of the team, okay? That is certainly not the meaning. But what they want to highlight is that a Scrum Master has certain responsibilities, and as a true leader, he or she should lead by example, should really live the values of Scrum, and should feel truly responsible for the product development. So I think in that sense, a Scrum Master should be a true leader, leading by example, and being somebody who the rest of the team likes to follow, okay? Because not because the person has a formal authority, but because the person has maybe even a certain charisma, or at least is somebody who is really knowledgeable and motivating, and so that's why people want to follow that person. Okay, so I think that's what's behind this new term, the true leader or the leader who serves. Okay.
Yeah, also, I think it's really important that now it's clear that the Scrum Master is accountable for the team's effectiveness.
Yeah.
So if the Scrum team is not effective in delivering the value, then the Scrum Master is not doing a great job. Because I believe there's so many Scrum Masters that know the theories, but they don't really know effectively how to lead a team. So now we have a more clear indication whether to retain the Scrum Master or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Well, there's a fourth terminology change, which is they changed the term from self-organizing to self-managing. Okay, so why has that change been made? Well, apparently some people were abusing the term self-organizing just to justify that they want to do whatever they want to do. Okay, and self-managing, according to the 2 authors of the Scrum Guide, means that you are bound to the company goals. Okay, so you're self-managing in the sense that you can choose how to achieve these goals. You can choose your own way how to get there, but the goals of the company are still something important, and you cannot just say, oh, we're self-organizing, we can do whatever we want, even if it's not aligned with what the company wants to achieve. Okay, so I think these are 3 language terminology changes. Okay.
Yeah. And I also believe that change actually makes the Scrum team a little bit more empowered, because now they even have a little bit more authority to figure out how to deliver value products to their customers. I mean, remember that Scrum they want to empower people to solve complex problems. So yes, I do believe that some people were taking advantage, but also I believe that it also gives a little bit more power to the team.
Yeah. Well, there's another thing that I find quite significant, and these are the 3 sprint planning questions. Okay, so they added another question. This question is, why is the sprint valuable? Okay, so I think that this question goes actually in a totally different direction, and is something that is very, very interesting. Why? Well, I think this question is so important because it emphasizes the importance of crafting a decent sprint goal. Okay, so what I observed really frequently in real world Scrum teams is when they were about to craft the goal for the next sprint. The sprint goal was something like, we want to finish all selected stories, which of course is not really a sprint goal. Okay, so now when you have to ask this question, why is the sprint valuable? The answer to that question basically is the sprint goal. Okay, so now you really have to come up with a, let me call it a headline for the sprint. So it needs really a title. It needs to a short description. What is the value that will be delivered to the client after having finished that sprint? So I think this tiny little question, why is the sprint valuable, really forces you to come up with good, reasonable sprint goals that really describe value. And I think most of the Scrum teams that I know have this problem that they are not able to describe or to write down a reasonable sprint goal. So I think that certain question goes really into that direction, forcing people to come up with better sprint goals. Yeah,
I totally agree with you.
Yeah. So then we have a couple of more changes that might be more or less significant. Well, we have the 3 commitments that are added. Well, 2 of them already existed. They were just not called commitments, but they already existed. And we have now the product goal as something actually completely new. Okay. And finally, the Scrum Guide now is supposedly less prescriptive. I'm not so sure about that. But this is also a quite important change. Okay, so sorry, now we have 7 changes in total and not 5 that you asked for. But okay, I think these are maybe the most important ones that you could read most about in the Scrum community.
Yeah, I love that, because I mean the idea is to show our lifelong learners like all the changes that they can use on this opportunity to learn in case that they're not really sure on the changes that they made. Mm-hmm. Do you think that there are any other significant changes?
Yeah, well, for me, it was really surprising that some quite significant changes were almost not recognized by the community. Okay, let me just give you 2 examples. The size of the Scrum team was changed, actually, and also the term estimates was completely eliminated from the Scrum Guide. Okay, so I think these are 2 super important things that almost nobody was talking about. Okay, I realized several of these smaller changes that are a little bit hidden in the Scrum Guide, and so that's why I made a small series of videos that I posted on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on these hidden changes in the Scrum Guide. So if you're interested in hearing more about these details, I invite you to shift over to my channel and of course after completing this video and maybe have a look on those hidden changes that I'm describing in detail.
You know what, actually, now that you just mentioned the Scrum team, I was actually was gonna mention it, that like if the Scrum team is too large or has more than 10 people, it should be split into multiple cohesive Scrum teams that work towards the same goal. Because I believe so many people still think that Scrum is only applicable to small teams, and it doesn't scale to multiple teams working on a single product. So I totally forgot I was gonna say something about that, but I think that's a really, really important change.
Yeah, Gina, you're mentioning something really interesting, because I mean, it was always like that you could split up teams, but it was never mentioned. And so people are always scared to split up teams. And now that it is explicitly mentioned in the Scrum Guide, that it is truly an option to split up teams, I think that is a good improvement. And yeah, so maybe more people dare to actually split up a team.
So is the Scrum Guide really less prescriptive? I know you just mentioned some doubts.
Okay, well, they simplified the language, that's true, and they made it less prescriptive, okay? So this is actually true. However, I think the Scrum Guide still is pretty prescriptive, okay? They tell you which are exactly the three accountabilities. They tell you about the three artifacts, and they tell you how they are structured. They describe especially the events in all detail. How long can they take? What's the content? Who are the participants, and so on. So I think it's pretty prescriptive still. So I don't see honestly that they move that far away from the prescriptive character of the Scrum Guide. I mean, it's less prescriptive, but from my understanding still, it's pretty prescriptive. But I think, why should that be negative? I mean, especially for beginners, it might provide much more guidance if it's very prescriptive. So for my understanding, it's still prescriptive, but I wouldn't call it a downside of the Scrum Guide. It just helps you to handle Scrum better, especially when you're a beginner.
Agree. Now, do you think that Scrum is now less software development oriented?
Well, that's another terminology question, actually. They removed some software-specific terminology from the Scrum Guide, okay? So now it's more plain language. And however, that is not that revolutionary, because even before in the Scrum Guide 2017, it was mentioned that you can apply Scrum to any product development, okay? However, I think this change doesn't really change anything for the real world scenarios. Scrum is still mostly applied to software development. I hear of many cases where Scrum supposedly is applied to other fields outside software industry, but when you have a closer look, you realize they just call it Scrum because doing Scrum sounds modern and cool. But if you really look into what they are doing, you see they are not doing Scrum, okay? So let me give you an example. A client of mine who's a bank, recently some employee of them told me, hey, our competitors, Bank XY, they are completely a Scrum-based bank and they do everything with Scrum. And they were kind of shocked. And so we looked a little bit deeper into what's happening there. And what they were doing is they were calling together everyone in the bank once a week for a stand-up meeting, and managers were telling their employees what they have to do for the rest of the week. Okay, and they call this Scrum. So this has nothing to do with Scrum. It just sounds really cool to say our bank completely works with Scrum, but it's not Scrum. So I think if people tell you we are working with Scrum outside the software industry, it's always worth having a closer look and see if they're actually doing Scrum or if they're just calling it Scrum, yeah? Or something else I see pretty frequently is that people are working always in kind of 2-week sprints, or they are oriented towards 2-week time periods. And that's why they call it Scrum, but they don't do a planning in the beginning. They don't do a retrospective or a review at the end. They turn in an increment at the end of this 2-week term. And so their thinking just changed into a 2-week term thinking, but that doesn't make it Scrum, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's completely true. Like some people just pick the things that they little pieces, and they think that by using it, they're using the whole framework, but not really. So,
I mean, this is totally fine what you're just mentioning, because I sometimes have people in my Scrum classes that tell me afterwards, hey, I think Scrum can be really applied to my workplace, but I still learned something really important because some of the elements of Scrum are very useful for me, and that is fine. That's totally fine, but you shouldn't call it Scrum. Exactly. If you're just doing once in a while a stand-up or something, it's not Scrum.
But I have a question. But if Scrum is mainly applied to software development, does it make it less desirable to learn Scrum and obtain a certification?
I don't think at all. Let me quote Mark Andreessen, one of the founders of Netscape. He once said, software is eating the world. Okay, I guess this expresses pretty well the overwhelming importance of software. Okay, so lots of value creation nowadays is not done by physical objects, but rather by software. Okay, Let me just give you some examples. I used to work for Mercedes-Benz, and I'm a huge car fan. So let me give you an example from the car industry. Okay, so cars is something that you usually might associate totally with hardware. Okay, so if you think of a car, you think of an engine, of a chassis, of a body, whatever. Okay, so but think of the main new features that were introduced in the last years into this industry. Okay, think, for example, of driver assistance systems or safety features. Think of connectivity, of navigation systems. Think of something that is just so simple, like a rear camera. Okay, so these rear cameras, they always show you orientation lines that are telling you where you're going exactly. Well, all that is software based. Okay, so software is everywhere and supports every new feature in a car, even though it looks very hardware based. Software is creating so much value in modern cars. Okay, so I think software will even gain more importance in next year, and if software gains importance, everything that supports software development will also become more important, and therefore Scrum will be more important. So I think it's not a bad thing to say Scrum is something that is pretty much closely attached to software development. For me, that is not negative at all.
I totally agree with you. And going back to the certifications, how do you think these changes on the Scrum Guide impact the certifications? The Scrum
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I had the privilege to be part of the team that could update the Scrum exam, and I can tell you most questions have been modified, at least in a minor way. Okay, we eliminated some questions completely. We added some questions. We enlarged the database of questions a little bit. However, I think that changes in the exam triggered by the changes in the Scrum Guide are not that radical. Okay, many changes we made in the exam refer to new terminology, for example, and we just talked in the beginning of our interview about that terminology has changed quite a lot, and of course we had to adopt that in the Scrum exam and Scrum Master exam and Product Owner exam.
Thank you so much for your help. What about the removal of the 3 questions in the daily Scrum?
What a great decision. This is actually one of my favorite parts of the new Scrum Guide. I love the fact that they removed the three questions. Okay, let me tell you why. I think it's pretty easy to find out if a Scrum team is doing, or if developers are doing a good daily Scrum or not. If you observe them and one speaks after another, it is usually a bad daily Scrum. If they really start discussing, exchanging opinions, framing problems, giving solutions, proposing something, getting into a discussion, then it's a good daily Scrum. Okay, because I think if you are answering these 3 questions, the biggest danger of that is that the daily Scrum turns into a reporting event. So you're just reporting, and even more than reporting, you're justifying yourself. You're justifying your existence on the team. Hey, yesterday I did this, today I will do that. So there's a reason why you pay my salary. Okay, and this is something we absolutely don't want. We want people to move towards the sprint goal. So they should discuss what has to be done, which issues and problems have to be solved, or how work should be tackled, should be distributed. And you can't do that by answering 3 questions one after another. You should do that really in a discussion. So I think it's super, super beneficial to remove these 3 questions.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, especially because, I mean, the idea, I mean, this is not a daily status report. And what it does when you ask those questions, it tends to hold back on creativity and collaboration. Like you just mentioned, it makes it seem like, oh my God, I have to say what I'm doing to justify why I'm part of the team, or let me see if my other team member is doing more than I'm doing. So I totally agree. I'm so happy that they removed it. I think it's a really positive change.
Yeah. You know what? Also, clients once told me what I found really interesting. He told me, if you're applying these 3 questions to your daily Scrum, what happens is that people do not listen anymore to what the others say, because they think, oh, there are only 2 people in front of me, and then it's my turn. Though they're already thinking, what will be my answers? And they are not listening anymore to what the others say. They're just preparing their own answers, which is really bad behavior.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So what do you think about of the refinement changes?
Oh, okay, Gina, you're moving me from the best parts of the changes to the worst parts of the changes within 2 questions, okay? So I will be very honest with you. The changes with regard to the refinement, I don't like them really. Yeah. I think it's the changes are very blurry, contradictive. They're in some way a little bit strange. Let me give you examples for that. Okay, I will quote literally from the Scrum Guide. Okay, so the Scrum Guide says developers who will be doing the work are responsible for the sizing. The product owner may influence the developers by helping them understand and selecting trade-offs. Okay, so this phrase refers to refinement. Okay, so okay, let's try to analyze what's in that phrase. So they are basically saying that the developers are mainly responsible for doing the refinement. Okay, so the product owner might help them if it's necessary. Okay, so my understanding was always that the refinement is being done by the developers and the product owner together, because I mean the product owner is the one who should maintain the product backlog and update it, and so it makes sense that the product owner participates in that work of breaking down and sizing and better understanding the product backlog elements. Okay. However, the weird thing is, in another chapter, in the chapter about sprint planning, it says the Scrum team may refine these items during this process. Okay, so in one part of the Scrum Guide, they mentioned that it's mainly a job of developers and the PO might help a little bit. And another part of the Scrum Guide, they say it's a job of the Scrum team. So it's basically the developers, the Scrum Master, and the product owner. So who's doing it then? Okay. And the other thing that I find really irritating is that they are mentioning that in the context of the sprint planning. Okay, so you should do refinement, in other words, or you may do a refinement during the sprint planning. Well, yeah, you can do it, but honestly, I think it's not a good idea at all. Okay, I haven't seen Scrum teams that really apply that successfully, because usually when you do the refinement, there are always coming up questions and doubts. And if you have to resolve these doubts within the time box of a sprint planning, it sometimes doesn't work out. So I think it's always much, much safer to do the refinement before you go into the sprint planning. And also in this scenario, only in this scenario, a definition of ready makes sense. I mean, if you go into the sprint planning, but you haven't refined any stories, you can't apply a definition of ready. So I think it's not a smart move to start a sprint planning without having refined previously the stories. So from that perspective, also, I think it's kind of confusing and it doesn't guide us into the right direction.
Yeah, now that you explain it that way, now I totally understand. And I didn't take it that way, but now that you have given me all these examples, I see it. It's a little confusing.
Yeah, maybe it's just a thing of what is your interpretation? I mean, that was my personal interpretation. Maybe somebody reads something into that, but my reading is that you can do now, or it's definitely an option to do refinement during sprint planning, which I don't think is a good idea.
Yep. So now let's move a little bit to the product back changes. Sorry, let's talk about the product backlog changes. What do you think about the product goal?
Okay, the product goal. There's one thing again that I don't like that much. Okay, so I don't want to be too negative, but let me mention that. The Scrum Guide holds for us a definition of what is a product. Okay, so they are saying, let me quote from the Scrum Guide: a product is a vehicle to deliver value. It has a clear boundary, known stakeholders, well-defined users or customers. A product could be a service, physical product, or something more abstract. Okay, honestly, this definition of a product, if you don't tell people that it's from the Scrum Guide and you tell them it's from the PIM book of the PMI, they probably might think that that could be true. Okay, because for me that sounds a little bit like a scope statement or so. Yeah, and I think in that sense it could be confusing that people think, oh, now in Scrum we have to define everything from the beginning. We have to do the perfect planning before we start working. Okay, and this is not the truth. I mean, still. Scrum is something that is heavily based on inspect and adapt. You deliver something, you learn, you adapt, and you don't have to come up with a perfect plan from the first moment on. Okay, so in that sense, the definition could be, from my point of view, a little bit confusing. Okay, and but I think it's also a positive thing that we have product goals. Why? Well, let me give you an image that I read in a blog that I really liked. So they're basically saying, imagine you're standing at a river, okay? On the other side of the river, there's a product vision. And now you want to get to the other side. You want to reach that product vision, but how do you get over the river? Well, there are some stepping stones in the river, okay? And so you can jump on the first stone, which would be a product goal. And from that, you jump to another stone. And so these kind of stepping stones in the river, they are product goals. Each product goal is something, they call it long-term in the Scrum Guide. I would call it rather medium-term. And so it has a time frame of maybe 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, I would say, for a product goal. So it embraces basically the content of a couple of sprints. And so you jump from one stone to another, and each of these jumps to another stone brings you a little bit closer to your product vision.
Yeah, I think something positive that I saw is because there are too many product owners who still have a fixed product mindset and won't have a long-term goal for the product. So it makes it a little bit easier for the Scrum Master to teach the Scrum team that this sprint goal must connect to a higher level goal. So that's the reason why I think it was a positive change. I mean, a positive add to the guide to help the team understand that.
Absolutely, yeah, totally agree.
So now let's go back to I want to mention something about that has happened in our sessions. In some sessions with our partners, you have mentioned the Scrum Guide is a political issue. What do you mean by this?
Well, as soon as more than one person is involved in something, it gets political. Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's not a secret that the Scrum Guide is written by two people, Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland. And I think it's also known in the Scrum community that there are sometimes some tensions between the two of them, and they do not agree on everything. So I think the Scrum Guide in some ways also a negotiation solution, okay, between two people. I think it's not super political. I think other products as the PIM book, for example, is definitely much more political because many more people are involved there. But yeah, the Scrum Guide is not always the one single best opinion of one person, but it's the result of a negotiation between two people that, of course, have different views on certain aspects of Scrum.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Now, as a recap, how do you feel about the new Scrum Guide 2020 changes? Were they worth? Let me rephrase that. As a recap, how do you feel about the new Scrum Guide 2020? Was it worth these changes?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think 95% of the changes are really good. I mean, you just realized maybe during our interview that I was criticizing a little bit the refinement process. I'm not necessarily saying that it's wrong, but I think it's not expressed very well in the Scrum Guide. The different phrases that refer to the refinement might be a little bit confusing, but the rest is really good. I like the structure. They keep it simple. They clarify the language. I can see almost only positive aspects in these changes.
And the Scrum Guide is a live document. What other changes do you think are gonna come in the near future?
Well, I was honestly hoping that product backlog refinement. I mean, probably you already realized that I'm emphasizing a lot on refinement. I find it a really important thing. So one of my wishes would be to call the refinement also a Scrum event. I think that would make it, that would lift it a little bit in its importance and would clearly state that it's not something that you might do on the side, but it's really a formal event that you have to do. I mean, it shouldn't, it doesn't have to be a single event that's done once. You can do it several times. You can do it in several meetings, but maybe if that could be formalized a little bit more to highlight it more, its importance, that could be a positive thing. But I don't see that coming. Another discussion that I hear over and over again is, do we want to have a definition of ready or not? Okay, so supposedly from what I heard, there's a certain difference in opinion between the two authors of the Scrum Guide. One of them thinks that the definition of ready should be included. The other one thinks it shouldn't. And so, well, the result is there is no definition of ready.
Great. Based on your experience, what's the #1 advice you will give to our community of lifelong learners who want to get certified in Scrum?
Okay, maybe I can expand it to 2 advices. First one would be, you already mentioned the Scrum community. You mentioned that the Scrum Guide itself is just a very brief guide, but I mean, it won't give you all the information that you need on Scrum. So going to certain Scrum events, and maybe as we're heading towards a lighter state of the pandemic, let's say, maybe we can also have on-site gatherings again. So do that, read forums, read books. Get involved in the community. I think there is so much more to discover than only the information that's included in the Scrum Guide. I think that's also something very positive. The fact that the Scrum Guide is so short leaves a lot of room and space for people to add more of their ideas. I mean, we could mention the word Scrum pattern here, which is something that I think is worth investigating a little bit. So get familiar with Scrum patterns. Certain ways of behavior within the Scrum framework that could boost your efficiency and your success. So investigate a little bit on that. I think that could be something really useful. Okay. And the other thing is, what worries me sometimes a little bit with Scrum is that we see more and more, I call them badge hunters. Okay. So people who just want to have the title Scrum Master or Product Owner on their resume, on their CV. But I think this also is a little bit dangerous, because if you just study to pass the exam and to know more or less the answer to the question, but you have no idea how to perform this role actually, or well, accountability, sorry, I'm still falling back into the old terminology. So if you don't know how to really perform this accountability and to act as one of the 3 accountabilities, and somebody selects you for a certain job because you have that on your resume, it could be dangerous for everyone. It's dangerous for the employer, it's dangerous for the employee, and it's finally dangerous for Scrum, for the Scrum community, and for the other certificate holders, and also the organizations that are certifying, because we're all losing credibility, and finally also the trainers. Yeah, everybody's losing credibility, and so that's not a really positive thing. So always try to connect the badge with the knowledge.
I totally agree with you. That's 100% true. So, Dr. Jörg, where can we find you if we want to know more about you?
Yeah, well, you can have a look on my YouTube channel, which is just like my name, Jörg Rössler. Just type that into YouTube and it will find me. Also have a look on my website, Ageria Consulting. There you can find courses of mine, and also have a look on my LinkedIn profile if you like.
That's awesome. Dr. Jörg, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience with our lifelong learners.
Gina, thank you so much for having me. It was a great pleasure. Thanks for giving me the space and the opportunity to talk with you. And I hope we see each other soon again.
Thank you. Thank you, Jörg. Thank you so much for everything.
All right. Thank you.
Bye. Take care. We want to thank those who choose to be here, and we hope this space has been an inspiration to promote the professional growth on our community. If you want to know more about Scrum certificates, visit CertiProf.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter as CertiProf. Let us know in the comments below what other topics you would like us to discuss. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to know about our upcoming episodes. See you in the next episode. Scrum on!